Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for joining us tonight as the St. Elizabeth University Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education takes its next big step, our next evolutionary step from a technological standpoint, and we begin live streaming our events. My name is Dr. Rich Quinlan. I am the director of the St. Elizabeth University Center for Holocaust and Genocide Education, and I'd like to welcome all of you tonight for what will undoubtedly be a very powerful and very poignant presentation of a documentary called Family Treasures Lost and Found. Tonight really can only happen because I have very, very talented colleagues with me. Both Josh Gonzalez and Brandon Hutchinson are the two very skilled people making this happen from a tech standpoint, because between you, me, and whatever is recording this, I honestly have no idea how any of this works. So I'm very happy that everything seems to be up. Hopefully you can hear my voice, and in a moment, you are going to see a truly, truly beautiful piece. Family Treasures Lost and Found was produced by Karen Frenkel and directed by Marcia Rock. Both Karen and Marcia will join us at the end of the documentary this evening for a Q&A, which will work a little bit differently from how we've done it in the past. Tonight, please just enter your questions into the chat, into the comment section on the St. Elizabeth YouTube page, and I will moderate that. And we will begin those questions and answers with the two of them as soon as the doc wraps up, and it's only about 75 minutes in length. Very, very quickly about the film, this is the story of Karen trying to fill in some of the gaps of her parents' lives during World War II. Her father was very reticent to talk about his experiences during the war, whereas her mother was a little bit more open about it. And what she found was an extraordinary collection of her parents' and grandparents' history. So I can tell you from having spoken with Karen, meeting her at the AHO conference last summer, this is a truly extraordinary woman with a remarkable story to tell. And with that, we will now begin Family Treasures Lost and Found. All right, now we have figured it out. We are back. We are live, and this is so much fun of doing anything for the first time. Is you get to watch people stumble through it blindly, and so I have now fallen down 4 or 5 times this evening, but I think I'm back. I'm up, and incredibly humbled and honored to have with us both the producer, the woman behind the extraordinary Family Treasures Lost and Found, Karen Frenkel, as well as Marcia Rock, the extraordinarily talented director of the documentary that we are all just witness to. Welcome to both of you. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much for having us and for celebrating our work.
Well, and for surviving the technology.
Yeah. Well, just watching me age about 10 years per second. So I appreciate your patience. So I know we're going to have people who were with us watching it on the live stream offer some questions in the chat in a moment. I would just like to take a few seconds to do a little bit of an introduction on the both of you, and then ask a couple of you questions as well. Then I'm sure we'll hear from others who were in attendance tonight. Both of you have just extraordinary careers. For Karen Frenkel, she was not just a writer and producer, but her writings focused on high technology and computer science, actually co-authoring a book with Isaac Asimov called Robots, Machines, and Men's Image, which is translated into numerous languages and selected by the U.S. Information Agency as one of 1,000 books to represent the diversity of American culture that traveled the Soviet Union in 1987. Karen began the work that led to this remarkable documentary back in 2014, and we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly she went through and how all of the efforts and all of the love and all the intensity that went into her research resulted in such a moving piece. And Marcia has actually produced 13 documentaries since 1984. And what I think is particularly poignant And I may be terrible with technology, but sometimes I am lucky. Three of Marcia's films actually revolve around veterans. So here we are on Veterans Day, and one of them in my research I went and checked out. It's called Service: When Women Came Marching Home, about women's veterans' transition from active duty to civilian life. That was the winner of a New York Emmy. Her other films, and this one I'm actually using in a class that I'm currently teaching, was from 2007 called Salt Harvesters of Ghana, which talked about the dignity of women working in a grueling landscape. Winner of the Best Short at the Newburyport Documentary Film. I would suggest look up both of these remarkably talented people, go through their resumes, because it will be astounding what you find, and the kinds of films, works, books, and articles that you can immerse yourselves within. So thank you both for being here tonight. Um, I wanted to start, Karen, with you for if I may. I know you said that you began this journey, I guess you could say in a formal manner back in 2014, but for how long within your life had some of these questions been resonating with you? And what was it? Was there some particular moment in 2014 that led you to say, this is what I now have to do with my life moving forward?
In every decade of my adult life, I tried to approach this material. In my 20s, I tried to, in a screenwriting class at the New School, I tried to begin to address my father's silence with the memory of a particular fountain in Vienna that he loved, that he took us to when we were very little and we were visiting as a family. And the next decade, in my 30s, I tried again, approaching his service in the U.S. Army, and I became overwhelmed by the language, and I wasn't able to really discern what the unit histories were really about. And in 2014, I began in greater earnest because I was approaching my late 50s, and I thought, if I don't get some answers to my father's family and background, when will I? Now is the time. And so I asked the question of Hillel, the elder, which is, if not now, then when? And and I was also becoming a little bit bored with my beat. I was writing about cyber warfare, but at that time, the story was always the same. It was about companies spending millions of dollars to train their employees on how to safeguard entry into files, and they were not changing their passwords, or they were using they were using obvious passwords, and I got a little tired of it, so I tried again.
Excellent. Thank you. Marcia, how did you and Karen come to work together, and coming from your perspective as someone who is directing and putting together such remarkable documentaries that you have, what was it about this story that made you feel that you had to be a part of this?
Karen and I met through an organization called New York Women in Film and TV, and we worked on a documentary committee together. And Karen told me about a nonfiction, what is it called, Karen? A
Narrative nonfiction, are you
narrative
thinking?
nonfiction, correct. And about her parents. And she kept feeding me chapters, and I was just in awe of the story. So then I said to her, well, Karen, you're going to need some video for your website. Why don't I interview you? And one thing led to another, and we kept the interview going. It was COVID, and so it was good for both of us to stay very, very active that way. And then she showed me her photo archive, and I was just stunned by such an archive. Archives like that are very, very few, because most people who survived the Holocaust had nothing.
Yeah, no, it's utterly extraordinary everything that you unearthed, Karen, and these stories that you were telling, that Marcia captured and pieced together so perfectly. I think I probably speak for a number of people who were watching this, and I've seen your film now a couple of times. Rose really comes across as a trip of a character. So as you're beginning to delve into this, which had to be, at the beginning at least, somewhat uncomfortable as you're realizing that there's another woman in your father's past,
Mhm.
and then it takes you down the rabbit hole into New York organized crime. I mean, just can you describe what that feeling is like as you're just finding sort of new piece of fascinating information after new piece?
Well, let me just say that for for most of the time that I was growing up, until my father's death, my sisters and I did not know anything about Rose. We found out about Rose because we were going through my father's papers in his study at home about a year after he died. And my sister, Michelle, was shocked by an envelope that she found. And my mother answered in a way that was clear she really didn't want us to know very much. And but she saved the envelope, and she saved that one photo that you saw of my father and Rose dancing. And I never examined it until 2014. And on the back, there were some clues that I thought were really important. I did know that she was a gangster mom. My mother said she had a boyfriend, and that the boy that Rose and the boyfriend thought that my father would cover for them, and that when he found out, he wanted out of the marriage and wouldn't go along with it. But it was pretty ugly, and I did also have the separation papers. So I followed through the separation papers up with the document from Florida. You saw the actual divorce paper, but it wasn't clear who filed for who initiated the divorce, or who was recorded as having been the aggrieved party. Um, but to not bog down in details, let me just say that the greatest discovery about that part of my father's life was the newspaper feature. On a whim, I had checked newspapers.com, which is part of ancestry.com, several times looking for Rose. But one day, because I had received an email saying we've updated our database and now have other newspapers that we've never archived before, we have them now in our collection, I decided to check again. And that's when the Austin Statesman article appeared. And when I told my sisters, they just, all of us, for at least 5 minutes to one another, said, "We can't believe this. Did they know that this article appeared? How is it that this was documented? How extraordinary that it was documented, and it raised all kinds of questions, of course. It answered many, but the question was like, why was Rose there waiting for him on the dock? Was this a marriage of convenience? If it was a marriage of convenience, were those crocodile tears? And I had Marcia will remember I was so suspicious of her, but at the same time, very grateful to her for having helped my father save himself. And what was her motivation? Did her motivation change? Was the boyfriend on the scene before she went to Lvov? So I was able to answer many questions, but not all. I still don't know what really transpired there.
But
But
you did track down her son.
I was just going to say, but I did speak to her son. And the reason why we have all those photographs of her is because I discovered another relative who had lived in Vienna the time that my father was there in medical school. And he knew Rose and remembered Rose from when he was a little boy. And he put me in touch with Rose, with a cousin of mine, another cousin of mine I'd never heard of, whose father was the witness to the marriage of my father and Rose. And that daughter put me in touch with Rose's son. And when I found out that she had a son, I thought, oh my God, do I have a half brother? So it was a flabbergasting experience, very exciting. And Marcia would hear about these installments as they unfurled.
Which actually brings me to my next question for Marcia, because as these stories are expanding, this documentary probably began in some form as you have a central idea of where it wants to go, and then it keeps expanding outward. How do you begin to piece together all of these stories, and how many hours worth of material were you playing with that you had to try to condense down to 75 or 80 minutes?
We, from the beginning, decided to use the structure of the family history research techniques. So that would be oral history, Google anything, sleuthing archives, the value of visiting, and then building a family tree. And we use that as an organizing tool to focus all the interviews and everything else. We then made it into a feature. The nice thing is that then we broke it apart and made it into a 5-part series, and it was fairly easy to do that for education, so that high school students don't have to watch 75 minutes, but has little chunks to watch over 2 or 5 days. So that was extremely helpful. This was actually a more controlled documentary than some of the others where you're out on location and running around. Karen had her video footage from 2016, but the big challenge was the archival footage and photographs. That actually I hadn't done before to this extent, and that was quite challenging. And also how do you handle some of the graphic images that you come across with the Holocaust? And we had an advisor who said, be careful of the pornography of violence. And with the Lvov pogrom, you don't have those women's permission to show their photographs. And so it became an interesting question. How do you show the violence and make it real and preserve someone's privacy? So we decided not to show faces, but the pogrom, they're very accessible photographs of women half naked, older women running around with just barely anything on, people being killed, bodies being carried. So it was an extremely violent pogrom, and we just had to make that decision.
And we wanted to be able to do that without sanitizing it. That was very challenging.
It must be, because you have to obviously strive to preserve humanity and the humanity of the people who were targeted, but at the same time, you certainly do not want to in any way soften the reality of what transpired. Because to your point, Karen, and you made this observation towards the end of the documentary, where you talked about being able to push back upon Holocaust denial, distortion, and lies that are out there. I want to ask you 2 questions, and Marcia, please jump in this as well. At one point in the documentary, you talked about the violence that was actually taking, or we saw images of violence that was taking place on universities. And when we were here marking this past weekend, honoring the memory of those who suffered during Kristallnacht, when you look at where we are right now versus the images, the scenes, the history that you saw in through your family's eyes in your documentary, what's your visceral response to this? What are you feeling as you see what's happening in the world, be it in the US, Amsterdam, so many other places around the globe right now?
It's a very difficult question to answer because there are many, many answers, and I have felt like a crazy wild pendulum for a long time, given the events that have transpired since October 7th, but also in the course of working on this for so long before, for 9 or 10 years or so before. I have the feeling sometimes that that Hitler won the war because there's so much trauma and damage ongoing that how can people be expected to have normal reactions? That's one thought I have. Another one is, will this never end? Were my grandparents murdered for no reason? And when can we have true tolerance and peace? And so it's extremely painful when I start to feel that with the pogroms in Amsterdam, for example, history is repeating itself. On the other hand, I understand why there is this situation now, and sometimes, as with 9/11, I felt in a way thankful that my parents weren't alive to see their haven. The United States was their haven, to not be a safe place. So it's extremely difficult as a child of survivors for whom this is not remote history, for whom fascism was very, very real, to feel hopeful. But I try and I resist, and I think now is the time for us all to resist, so that our ideals don't die.
For me, it was very much the language that we hear, demeaning people, dehumanizing people, so that it's more easy to put them down, to commit violence against people, be it Jews or Haitians. But the language used is out of the Hitler playbook, and that is very distressing.
And also, we were having a discussion about the Anschluss, Marcia and I, fairly recently, the footage, and whether there are warning signs now that are not being heeded.
The rapture for a leader who may or may not earn that rapture.
You mentioned, Marcia, that this has been shown to high school students and hopefully younger people as well. For both of you, what has the response been from younger viewers? How does this, because obviously I think everyone who is in attendance here tonight, we're all on the same page and we're all collectively fighting for the same thing. What has the response been from younger viewers, and do you feel that this is going to galvanize them in some way to try to fight for truth and reality in history?
We're just at the beginning of the rollout of the educational series, so I can't answer that yet, but hopefully in a few months I will be able to.
Are you focusing exclusively high school, or do you think this is something that could go down into maybe?
We think high school.
Yeah.
It's a little sophisticated, and we want to bring up issues like how do you control and demean people? One is stripping them of their identity, and other issues like that.
Another one is making them solely a very narrow identity, forcing them into a particular slot, whereas we know people are so multidimensional.
and the concept of quotas, and also the trying to humanize refugees. One of the things I love about Karen's family is that they, through those photographs, had such a rich cultural life and family life, right? They had traditions, and they weren't, you wouldn't think of them as refugees, but they became refugees where her mother had to sell soybeans so they'd have something to eat. So it's really good to know that refugees, immigrants, come from somewhere and have a culture and dignity and identity before they were so compromised.
Of course, I mean, you're humanizing people, which of course all too often now, all too quickly, people are labeled, discarded. There is a true loss of trying to grasp the fact that there's humanity in everyone, and instead we're back to seeing people use as scapegoats and goats. And you're absolutely correct in terms of the return of the language, and we see over the course of genocides how the playbook is exactly the same, and the
Right.
language is always so frequently the exact same. It could be places as divergent as Germany to Rwanda to Bosnia to Cambodia, but it's the same
Yeah.
fundamental idea
Yeah.
that people just seem unable to grasp. Will either of you be speaking at high schools and speaking directly to students?
We will be speaking to the teachers who will speak to the students.
Okay.
Um,
No,
I,
listen, that's critical. That's critical. I can just tell you, I taught eighth grade for 25 years. Um, if you were in there too, looking at them and telling the story, I know how much it would resonate. Sometimes I certainly find it in my college classes, they can get tired of my voice. That can happen with teachers, but you know.
One thing I would like to just add is that I feel that, and I have felt all throughout this project, whether it was the original account about my parents or the memoir that is a companion to the film that's not out yet but coming out, is that it's always been my hope that people would that people could be reached by understanding the details, that the specifics of what happened to a family, and that sense of connection, whether the people have had similar experiences or not, would that sense of connection would result in empathy, even if they haven't had that same experience. You know, they've had similar emotions of fear and loss. We all have loss, and so um, that was the hope and approach all along.
And
Well,
if I
you
could
have this,
say,
Because let me just say one thing, because I feel that we are wired to understand individuals, but statistics, thousands murdered, millions murdered, is so overwhelming that people cannot absorb it. So that's why our approach, though people might think it's very narrow, it's from that specificity that it can, in a way, blossom out to a sense of connection. We think.
so I was going to say one last thing, that in the editing of the film, I got to know Karen's mother, and I had to go back as I really got to know her and listen to her, and listen to that oral history another time. And I picked up so many other things that I realized how wonderful it would be if Karen and her mother told the story together. We call it the duet. And I hope the audience enjoyed that experience of daughter and mother telling the story together. We certainly did.
there's that you have a beautiful line in the documentary and also in the description of it, Karen, where you talk about how you learned to love people you never knew. And I'm wondering too, Marcia, in a way, did you somehow become emotionally connected and feel that you knew Karen's extended family as well, spending the length of time that you did in the producing of this film.
Well, particularly her mother, because some of the things her mother says just are stunning. The insights that she had, not only to seeing what was coming, but to think that she could save her parents, and the absurdity of class. You know, when she was a slave laborer and they said, oh, she's sort of above the others, you know, she's from a better house. I mean, and her mother understood the absurdity of that kind of class jealousy during a war. I mean, it was insane. So I think for her mother the most. And then I think Karen painted a picture of her other grandmother, Michaela, the most, having gone to Lvov and seeing the house and what it takes to put the story together to create a personality when you have no information and one or two photographs. It's such a hard thing to do.
I would just like to add two thoughts to what Marcia said. For my sisters and me, watching the oral history was extremely difficult and very painful. And we didn't, each of us, watch it as soon as we could have. I tried several times to watch it. So you see my mother, but you don't see the mother that we knew, because she was ill at ease. To us, she was very controlled and didn't really want to be there. And I felt guilty that I had nagged her to do the testimony, and it was really hard to take, very, very hard to take, her being so uncomfortable. However, when I saw the footage broken up into small quotes and bracketed by the history and the archival material, it became more palatable to me. And my sisters also felt something like that, you get a sense of how charismatic my mother was, but to my sisters and me, she was a master of constraint and understatement compared to the very charming and outgoing woman that she was, that we knew and we loved. So oral history is a very interesting tool because it depends on the interviewers, the skill of the interviewers to keep things on track, to not interrupt the interviewees, so that they can tell a story their way. On the other hand, so it's kind of a complex thing.
Well, that balance was certainly struck perfectly throughout the documentary. So
Yes.
both for that. I noticed now, I looked over, we don't have questions in or through the YouTube page. It's probably something I did wrong. I don't know. I probably hit a button that turned everything off. So if anyone does have questions for either of you, what I will do is people can easily contact me, and I'll pass along any questions that may not have been asked tonight. Hopefully you can find a couple of free moments to respond. But I wanted to sort of bring this to a close tonight with a question for you, Karen, and Marcia. Certainly, I would love your opinion as well. You were discussing the aspect of luck towards the end of the film, and you had this fascinating question where you said, "Is fate character or is character fate?" And I'm wondering, have you settled upon an answer for that, and do you think you ever will?
Well, I think it's a combination. When I was thinking of that, I had a fantastic professor, a high school teacher of literature, and she talked to us about Oedipus. And that's when she brought up this question that I reiterated in the film. Was it Oedipus's character, his short fuse and his temper, that caused him to beat up the old man who was in his way as he was approaching the palace. Was it something about his character that brought on the punishment of blindness because he was incestuous with his mother? That's really what I was thinking about. And how does that extend to survival in the Holocaust? Was it my father's character that he saw very clearly as a diagnostician at the University of Vienna, that the continent was moribund, that there was a pathology there that was going to grow, and that it was time to leave, that he couldn't fight it, there was something so immense that he had to leave, and why was it that he saw it and others did not? And so I grapple with that. I think it was partly his personality, partly his training as a doctor. So that's
But then the heart attack or whatever happened on the dock. That was luck.
That was luck. So then you had but it was not luck, I think, that he married Rose.
Right.
This goes, I cannot resolve what happened. What did they fall in love? Was it an arranged marriage, a marriage of mutual benefit? But it was probably my father's personality, a practical side of him that had reached its threshold, and he knew he had to get out. So, but because she was around the corner from she was staying around the corner from his parents' house, it seems that there were other forces at play. Maybe the parents insisted on it. I'll never know.
Okay.
So I do not have a conclusion to that.
So we have one final question because it comes from Josh, who is one of the two young, extraordinarily talented IT geniuses who helped keep me sane and made all of this happen tonight. Without these two guys, none of this happens. And he wants to know, and I think it's a very interesting question. Karen, he said, are you still finding out more information about your family? Is the quest
Yes.
to learn more still going on? Yeah.
Well, there were two discoveries that were made when we were in production. For example, we only touched on it in the film, but there were several things that I had avoided. One was finding out more about my uncle Milek, the brother who was lost of my father, and I asked Alex sometime in 2021 when we were doing the interviews, well into the interviews, if he would look into the archives at the Lviv Polytechnic, because I knew my uncle had been a student there. And I figured, well, if the University of Vienna had a dossier on my father that was the counterpart to the booklet that we showed, perhaps there's one at the Polytechnic. And Alex searched, and there was some kind of index, and he knew that there was a file. And the archivist was an apparatchik, a kind of a holdover from Soviet times, who was reluctant to do what he or she was asked, and made it difficult and drew out the process and so forth. But I was devastated, actually, by what we found. The photograph of my uncle as an adult really threw me, because I had only seen him in that one photograph of the five of them in Lvov, and he was a little boy. And to see him full of hope as a newlywed, as I found out from my uncle what he was in 1941, with love and hope in his eyes, and to see how he resembled my father so much more than I could ever have anticipated, just devastated me. At the same time, though, there was information in that dossier that clarified what happened to my family when the Soviets came in September, on September 17th or 19th, 1940. 1939, and that they were thrown out of the house that I thought was the house in which my grandmother had suicided. So there's more and more depth, but there was also information about what my grandfather's occupation was at the time that the Soviets arrived, and what confectionery he had worked in, and that sort of thing, and the addresses. So yeah, but that I haven't had very many discoveries since.
But you met your family in California.
Well, but that was long before the film.
Oh.
But I thought I was going to say something. What was it? Well, it'll come back to me.
Well, I think what all of this means is that the two of you can work together again, and there will be second documentary made, because this was absolutely brilliant, incredibly beautiful, and poignant. And I want to thank you both for your time, Marcia, for all of your directorial skills and talents, and obviously Karen, for the courage that it takes to put forth a very personal, very powerful story, to learn what you did and to put it out there for public consumption, is so important and so daring. And I'm really honored to have been able to meet you both and to work with you. And thank you also for your incredible patience in putting up with me.
No.
It seemed like the wires worked and things showed up. And so thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us.
Who was in attendance tonight. Reach out to me if you have any questions or would like Karen and Marcia's contact information. I will pass that along. Thank you, everyone.
One more thing, if
Yeah.
I might. May
Sure.
I ask a question of the audience, please? If you feel like answering this question, I would welcome some insight into which discoveries resonated most for you. What moved you the most, if you please?
I am sure I will get some answers, and I will send them all your way.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Have a wonderful night, everyone. Appreciate it.